So I think we can start now, Grant. We will do just quick translation after each slide, if you allow me. Is it okay?
Absolutely perfect, Shireen.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome our colleague Grant. We have been working together for a few years now. I know him and we had great experience, great success. And I would like to thank you, Grant, for joining us today. مساء الخير يا جماعة. أنا برحب بزميلي مستر جرانت سنوبل. جرانت هو من الناس اللي شاطرة في السبلاي تشين، هو في جنوب أفريقيا، هيعرف نفسه دلوقتي. واحنا اشتغلنا مع بعض في حاجات كتير وهو من الناس اللي عندها خبرة وأنا شخصيا اتعلمت منه وبنتشرف إن هو معانا النهاردة. So Grant, go ahead and introduce yourself. I just said that we worked together. I learned from you. I'm happy you are sharing with us today.
Thank you so much, Shireen, and thank you so much for the opportunity to do this as well. It was such a pleasure to work with you and your team, and also learned a lot from you. So let me quickly tell you a little bit about myself. It's quite a nice, a nice part of the session where you get to talk about yourself for a few minutes, right? So I've basically been in corporate and consulting environments in my career, various engagements, too many to mention actually here. But most probably, if I could really pinpoint where I've spent a lot of time, is in the planning aspect of supply chain management, sales and operations planning, looking at overall planning of business, demand planning, forecasting, and those sort of things, right? I've spent a lot of time really focused on that. I have been exposed to many different environments. Obviously here in South Africa, it's, there's different, it's a different environment here, both declining and increasing. So various different types of environments here in South Africa and in other places around the world as well. I do have a master's in supply chain management from the University of Johannesburg, and also I'm Scorpio certified. Part of which I think is relevant to today's discussion is that I was actually part of the ASCM Enterprise, some of the evaluations that ASCM is doing for clients, which I'll talk to you a little bit in this presentation as well. Shireen, would you like to translate any of that?
No, it's okay. You can go ahead, please.
Perfect. Great. So what is it that we're going to be doing in today's session? Well, I want to cover three things. The first one is looking at overall supply chain flows as a new currency that we are seeing within supply chain management. We also want to talk a little bit about supply chain sustainability motivators. So why is it that we want to be more sustainable? What do organizations want to do to become more sustainable? And why is it important for the consumers as well? And then also I'm going to show you a couple of frameworks that exist, as well as a specific tool for implementing sustainability practices. So I would like to actually talk to you a little bit about what's called the materiality index, which I really think helps to bring about the combination of looking at the business economics and the profitability that a business wants to achieve, but also bringing in what is important to the stakeholders. And we'll talk a bit about that in a moment. But really, in today's world, what is it that we need to be? Well, beyond just being profitable, and if you go back and think about the sort of the Industrial Revolution, really the focus during the Industrial Revolution was about being efficient, really making as many products as possible, really working the workers, working the machinery as far as possible to get the output. But we've seen that change. We are still seeing the drive to be efficient, of course, but now organizations need to be robust, be able to survive and weather the storms that exist in today's business world, also be socially aware and environmentally responsible. So there's a lot more on our plates now than there has ever been, I think, in history.
Okay. هو بيتكلم هنا على السستينابيلتي او البقاء، ان احنا ازاي نساعد الكرة الارضية ونحافظ على الريسورسز اللي موجودة عندنا. تمام. السبلاي تشين اللي احنا النهارده موجود لازم يبقى روبست، هو بمعنى ان هو بيقول قادر ان هو يقدم الخدمه اللي العميل بيطلبها بالسعر المطلوب بالانتاجيه المطلوبه. المصانع بتطلع انتاجيه، بتحاول تستغل المصادر والماكينات بتاعتها، بتوصل المنتج، بس احنا في نفس الوقت محتاجين نبص على النظره تاثيرنا في المجتمع. الشركات النهارده حصل عندها تغيير في النظره، مش ان انا بس بركز على الربحيه، أنا بركز على الربحية بتاعتي وببص على النظرة على تأثيري في المجتمع وفي البيئة. لان كل الشركات دلوقتي بتعاني من عواصف، بتعاني من حاجات كتير ممكن تأثر على البيزنس بتاعها وعلى البقاء لفترة طويلة. تمام. فدي النقط اللي هو هيتكلمنا عليها، وهيتكلم على حاجة اسمها materiality index، هيشرحها لنا علشان نشوف أهمية الحاجات بالنسبة للشركات، واللي بيحفز الشركات انها تفكر في السبلاي تشين sustainability. Go ahead.
Excellent. So what I'd like everybody to do, and maybe Shireen, you might want to just translate this one, but I'd like everybody to use either your phone on your browser or your laptop. You can use your laptop or your phone to do this. But if you can go to this website over here, polev.com/ICHAT819, and you can answer this question for me. So there'll be a place for you to answer this question. And really what I want to get the sense of is, what is in your mind supply chain sustainability? What does this...
Can you copy it? Can you copy it to the comments, please, or type it in comments?
Let me do that.
جرانت دلوقتي عايزنا كلنا نكتب الويب سايت اللي فوق اللي هو polev.com/ICY819. هو موجود دلوقتي. شكرا لمحمد قاسم اللي كتبه. بليز بريس على اللينك دي ونجاوب. هو عايز يعرف احنا وجهة نظرنا ايه، فهو محتاجنا كلنا دلوقتي ان احنا نفتح على البراوزر سواء من الكمبيوتر او التليفون ونجاوب على السؤال.
Great, thanks. I see that Mohammed Qasim did send the link to everybody. If you can just check the chat. So I'll give everyone a few moments just to type in some of their... Perfect, so we're getting a few answers there. The first one we can see is green supply chain. Yep. So really focusing on the environmental aspect of sustainability there. We've got one here to make sure that the natural resources are not exhausted. Absolutely. Also definitely part of green supply chain as well. Management of raw materials, okay, supplying raw material and finished goods without having a negative impact on the environment and without depletion of natural resources. Absolutely. We can see the next one here, creating a flow of products and services that has minimal impact to the environment, but also creates a circular economy. I'm glad that you mentioned circular economy there. It's a very important topic. Environmentally friendly is to sustain the environment from demand to supply. Excellent. So we're getting quite a lot of good answers here. It's definitely, I think what we're talking about here, which a lot of you are putting in, this is really the green aspect of supply chain, or the green aspect of sustainability, right? So thank you for that. Okay, perfect. Keeping the environment from destroying. Excellent. Thank you everybody for your responses. I'm gonna move over this in the next few seconds. Shireen, do you want to translate some of what I said there in a...
دي الإجابات. دي الإجابات اللي الناس حطتها، إن إحنا نبقى أصدقاء للبيئة، إن إحنا نقدر نقدم منتجات بتساعد الشركة إنها تنجح، إن إحنا في ناس كاتبة الربحية، في ناس كاتبة تعريف السستينابيليتي، إن إحنا نركز على الليميتد ريسورسز أو المصادر المحدودة اللي هي منها المية والغذاء والطاقة. تمام. في ناس كاتبه ان احنا نقدر ان احنا نكمل بالسبلاي تشين بتاعنا سنين اكتر واكتر من غير ما نهدم المصادر اللي في الكره الارضيه. ازاي ناس كاتبه ازاي people profit planet، ان انا في السبلاي تشين سستينابيلتي ببص على الاشخاص وعلى الربحيه وعلى الكوكب اللي احنا عايشين فيه. في ناس كاتبه الربحيه تساوي البيئه اللي احنا عايشين فيها او الاستمراريه. اوكي، go on please.
Excellent. All right, thank you everyone. There was some great answers there, and I did see some that actually linked to what we're talking about now, which is the next question I'd like you to answer. So just stay on the same website you're on. You should see an updated question there. So really the question here is, in the organization you currently work, which of these bottom lines are the most important to your long-term business success? And I'm going to make it difficult for you because you can only choose one. So if you had to choose one of these, which one of these would you say is most important for that long-term success? Ethical, people, the profit, economic, or the environmental? Which one of those would you choose?
So it's from our perspective, not from company perspective, right?
It's from your perspective.
السؤال اللي بيسأله دلوقتي جرانت بيقول كل شخص فينا يبص على السؤال اللي طلع دلوقتي ويشوف في المؤسسة اللي أنا بشتغل فيها ايه اهم حاجه من الثلاثه دول انت شايفها او انا شخصيا كل واحد فينا شايفها لبقاء الشركه لونج تيرم؟ هل الاثيكال والبيبل اللي هي الاخلاق والمحافظه على الناس، ولا الاقتصاد والربحيه ان انا هيبقى عندي قيمه اقتصاديه، ولا ان انا احافظ على الانفايرمنت؟ سؤال تاني بيقول لونج تيرم بزنس سكسس. كل واحد فينا يختار ليه اختيار واحد فقط.
Fantastic. So as you can see here, there's quite a range of answers here. It's very difficult to determine this. If you don't look after the people, you're not going to have a business. If you don't look after your profit, of course, you're not going to have a business. And then the environmental aspect as well. If we have a planet that we're destroying, how are we going to work our business as well, right? So there is definitely, it seems to be very difficult to choose one, to be honest. And this is where the topic of this conversation comes from, is it's not really an or. We shouldn't really be choosing one over the other. We actually need to do all of this, right? And that's the whole point here. So thank you for those answers. Shireen, would you like to just translate that very quickly?
بيقول طبعا صعب علينا ان احنا نختار واحده من الثلاثه مهمين. هي اجابه صعبه. الربحيه مهمه عشان استمر، بس من غير بني ادمين والاسكس مش هقدر استمر، ومن غير الانفايرمنت مش هقدر استمر. وهو سؤال محير، وعشان كده ده سبب المحاضره بتاعتنا او الويبينار. اوكي.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that, everybody. All right, so now let's talk about a little bit about the flows of supply chain. And I mean, this goes way back to when I first learned about what is a supply chain, right? And it was always about the flow of stuff, okay, or different types of flows. And the first one was the flow of products. So going all the way from the raw material aspect to the consumer, right? All the different pieces that happen in between then, really the changes to the product that is made. So making the raw material into a product, selling it off, sending it to the retailer, and then sending it to the consumer. Of course, this is a very simple supply chain. There's many, many different variations of this. Okay. One aspect that is coming up quite a lot more, and you'll see this little blue arrow on the side, is the advent of return logistics. Through e-commerce, that's one reason why this is happening a bit more. So people will go online, they'll order a bunch of products, and then they return some of the products that they have. Clothing is a good example of this, because not everything is going to fit you, right? So you may be returning stuff. The other reason why this is happening is because there is a returns leg from a recycling point of view as well, that we're seeing more commonly come through. So looking at like the return of bottles, the return of plastics and things like that. And also looking at product life cycle management, really we are seeing that return aspect becoming a bit more important as time goes by. Translation, if you could, for me, Shireen, and then we'll go on.
أنا بيتكلم على الفلو أو التدفقات اللي خاصة في السبلاي تشين. أي سبلاي تشين بيبقى فيه كذا نوع من أنواع التدفق، هيشرحهم لنا واحد واحد. هي أساسية كلنا عارفينها. سبلاي تشين زي ما احنا شايفين فوق كده، الخامة، المورد، المصنع، التوزيع، بعد كده في الخطوات بتكمل لحد الكونسيومر. دي الرحلة. فهو بادي بأول حاجة اللي هي الفلو بتاع المنتج، الفيزيكال برودكت، والمرتجعات بتاعته كمان. اوكي.
Excellent. And then of course we have the flow of revenue, all right, which returns from the consumer all the way back to the raw material. And then we also have the flow of cost. I'm calling it a flow, but actually there's a cost associated with every step in that supply chain. We all know that this is extremely important to measure within supply chain management and relates to the economic aspect of supply chain. Okay. One thing we cannot forget is the flow of information. So the flow of information in the form of what is it that the consumer wants, and how do we anticipate the need of the consumer or the customer in that supply chain, and how do we distribute that information back down again, right? So various technologies we can use for that, forecasting techniques, and obviously, the advent of things like machine learning and stuff like that, which is making that a bit more easy to determine. The other part of it is risk, and looking at the potential risk into the future and seeing what that could be and trying to mitigate some of that risk. Shireen?
طيب هو هنا بيتكلم ان مش بس الفلو بتاع المنتج والمرتجعات بتاعته، في الفلو بتاع الريفينيو او الربحيه. لو نلاحظ هو جاي يعني عكس في التدفق. الدخل بتاعي امتى بريلايز الدخل بتاع السبلاي تشين. الحاجه الثالثه فلو اوف كوست، لان الخامه كاريز كوست او بتشيل تكلفه في كل مرحله من مراحل السبلاي تشين. وبرده في تدفق المعلومات، فلو اوف انفورميشن. بيقول دلوقتي مع وجود السيستمز والريسك مانجمنت والذكاء الاصطناعي ممكن الحاجات دي كلها تساعدني ان انا ازاي اشارك المعلومات او flow of information اللي بتحرك السبلاي تشين بتاعي. اتفضل. اوكي جون.
Excellent. Then, of course, we cannot forget, and this is where the new flows come in, is environmental cost and ethical cost as well. So when we talk about the environment, and a lot of you put that as one of your key sustainability definitions, but there is a cost in everything we do. So if you think of the manufacturer, for example, the manufacturer is producing pollution of some kind. When you think of even the consumer, how does the consumer dispose of a product that they may have, right? There's a perfect example of the plastic in the ocean that we have, and that impact, of course, from a consumer perspective. So this is looking at the whole supply chain and saying, what is the environmental cost of each of these areas within the supply chain? The same thing goes for, Shireen, you can go for if you could talk about the environmental one for me for a second.
طب حاجة مهمة قوي في الفلوز، احنا مش لوحدنا في السبلاي تشين، يعني احنا كنا دايما كل الناس حافظة 4 فلوز، لا هو احنا هنا بيضيف لنا حاجات تانية، مش بس الفلو، في الفلو بتاع الانفايرمنتال كوست. السبلاي تشين ده ايه تأثيره على الانفايرمنت او البيئة المحيطة بتاعتي، والاثيكال كوست بتاعت السبلاي تشين. اوكي.
Excellent. Yeah, and definitely from an ethical point of view, where do we see normally the ethical issues happen? Often, if we think of corruption is usually between the company and the supplier, right? Or between the company and its customer if there's a corrupt relationship. This is very common and it happens a lot. How can we establish the cost or the impact of those types of activities, right? So there's a very, very big aspect there. And then just very quickly to mention the performance management, looking at, if we look at historical KPIs for all of these aspects, we can look back and see what our performance was and manage that. But we also should be looking forward and try and identify where future risks could exist within each of these flows. Shireen?
حاجة اللي بيقولها هنا برضو جرانت، احنا الاسيكال احنا بنبص عليه اللي هو السبلاي تشين بيحصل كوربشن او بيحصل فساد او نوع من انواع المخالفات الاخلاقية فيه. برضو محتاجين نبص على الكي بي ايز، نضيف على البرفورمانس مانجمنت ان احنا الكي بي ايز بتاعتنا بتبقى لوكينج باكورد، يعني افتر ذا فاكت، يعني بعد ما حصل. محتاجين برضو ان احنا نبص على الريسك او المخاطره اللي في السبلاي تشين، والطرق اللي احنا يعني بنميتيجيت بيها الريسك بكي بي ايز بتكون بتبص لقدام. يعني بيقول في نوعين من الكي بي ايز، الريسك بتكون بتبص لقدام اكتر تحسبا وتوقع لمشاكل هتحصل في السبلاي تشين. اوكي.
Excellent, thank you. Then let's just look at this from a metrics perspective. So if we were to define metrics for each of these, I mean, these are pretty common metrics that you would all see within your supply chains currently, the products, financials, information related metrics, but also it's important to add on the environmental and the ethical metrics as well. The environmental cost is typically a bit easier to do because it's measurable. Carbon emissions, you can measure that. Waste production, we can measure that. How much hazardous material we produce, we can measure that easily. We can also measure the ethical cost as well. If you think of things like training and upskilling of people, compensation, the impact of the community. So there's a little bit less of a quantitative spin on ethics, but definitely it is measurable as well. Shireen? Shireen, if you could just translate that one for me.
اوكي شور. هنا بيتكلم على الماتريكس او طرق القياس بتاعه السبلاي تشين، اوكي، اللي هي لكل اسبكت هو وراه لنا من الفلوس، محطوط مع مجموعه كي بي ايز، واغلبهم احنا ممكن نكون عارفينهم او بنستخدمهم، اللي خاصين بالبرودكت، اللي خاصين بالريفينيو، اللي خاصين بالفاينانشال كوست والانفورميشن، وهو هنا عامل لنا ليستنج لمجموعه الكي بي ايز دي. اوكي. Okay.
And then of course, if we look at the risk, I mean, I think a lot of people will be familiar with the risk matrix. So looking at the likelihood of a risk occurring, as well as the impact of that risk, right? And plotting that in the risk matrix to really determine what the impact is of all these things. So there's an example, the first one that you can see there, the risk factor of company reputation and consumer perception. We've seen this a lot more and more, where consumers have access to social media. They can easily ruin the reputation of an organization very quickly, right? So it's really up to us to make sure that we are aware of that and understand the potential impact and how we can mitigate those sort of issues. Just out of interest, you'll see the one at the bottom there, disease and infestation. typical risk that could be incurred in an organization. One that we didn't really plan for very well before the COVID pandemic, but I think that this one is going to be a bit more on the risk matrix of many organizations going forward. Shireen?
من الحاجات اللي هو بيتكلم عليها هنا الريسك فاكتورز، هتلاقيها فاكتورز كتيرة مختلفة، وهتلاقي معمولة على اليمين طريقة تقييم أحمر وأصفر وأخضر. بيقول مثال بسيط جدا: سمعة الشركة، اسم الشركة. دلوقتي العميل بيدخل على السوشيال ميديا بيسمع عن الشركات، لو حصل أي فضيحة أو أي حاجة الناس كلها ممكن تقاطع منتج، وده ريسك كبير جدا. ففي أنواع كتير من الريسك هي موجودة هنا، وهو بيأكد على إن إحنا محتاجين السبلاي تشين بتاعنا يقسم. أوكي. So what is the base for these KPIs? Is it score model or what?
Some of them are score model, and then there are, for example, in the environmental and ethical cost, you'll see them in various other frameworks. So we'll talk a little bit about the frameworks. There's GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, in a moment, but these are examples. There's obviously a ton more metrics that could be used here, but yes, typically the score framework would be a good place to start for these metrics.
جريت. انا سالته الفريم او الريفرنس بتاع الكي بي ايز، في منها بعضها من السكور موديل وبعضها الحاجات الخاصه بالانفايرمنتال وكده، وان احنا في سورسز كتيره جدا ممكن نستخدمها. اوكي بليز.
Great. So everybody could go back into your poll everywhere. So you should be on the same page if you still have it open. It's the same link. So really what I would like you to do here is to really just rank the level of adoption of each of these. So all of these kind of themes in the organization, if you had to rank them in terms of what you think the level of adoption is in the organization, let's see if we could do that. You just have to move them around on your screen.
طيب هو حط لنا مجموعه من الحاجات، هنرجع لنفس الصفحه اللي احنا فاتحينها بتاعت بول اف او بول افري وير دي. عايزنا نرتبهم من الأعلى للأقل. الشركة بتاعتنا أدبت أو متبنية من أكتر. أوكي، فكل واحدة فين أكتر حاجة الشركة متبنياها هتبقى فوق، وأقل حاجة هتبقى تحت. You want to rank it by highest adoption, right?
Absolutely correct, yes.
يعني أكتر حاجة إحنا متبنيينها في الشركة أو موجودة عندنا أو بنعملها تبقى في الأول، وأقل حاجة تبقى تحت. فعايزنا نرتبهم من فوق، من الأعلى للأقل.
Excellent. So we can see some start to come through here. It looks like so far risk identification and mitigation is the most adopted of these themes. Using technology for visibility is also pretty high. Relationships with suppliers and customers, of course, is important. Good to see ethical is creeping up there a little bit. Yeah, good. Unfortunately, we have environmental focus at the very last at the moment. So not a priority for many people at this point. Okay, let's see. Let's see if one or two will come in. Let's see where we are with this. Okay, so interesting. Yeah, definitely. I think normally what I would expect is the execution activities to be pretty high, because people are typically very good, or organizations are very good at executing, orders, executing warehousing, executing activities that they need to do. Normally the planning sits a bit low, so it's actually better. Really good to see the planning is up there and quite high. Okay, great. And the use of technology for visibility is really great that it's sitting there, because that's how we enable the sustainability within the organization. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Shireen, I'll just move straight into this one. So really, what is the motivators for supply chain thinking, supply chain sustainability thinking? So let's look at it from the company perspective and then from the public perspective, right? So for a company, we want as an organization to be competitive. Okay, and we know that having a mindset of continuous improvement throughout the organization is going to help us to be competitive. We also want to make sure we demonstrate transparency. So really, there's more of a call from the public and from governments and from other entities that want an organization to be more transparent about where they operate, how they operate, and what they're doing within the places that they're operating in. We also want to ensure that suppliers align to the organization's values. So this is a key one. So when we think of our supply chain, we need to think beyond just the walls of our company. If we say that we have a practice in our organization to not use child labor, do we also ensure that our suppliers do not use child labor, right? So it's a good example of that. Managing accountability to ethical standards. embracing their culture of social responsibility, and also to really showcase supply chain excellence through initiatives that the organization can do. Of course, the last one there, which you'll see is probably the most important, obviously, right, is the long-term business robustness and profitability. Shireen, if you could just talk through those ones quickly, and then I'll go into the ones with the public.
طيب هو بعد السيرفي دخل على طول على supply chain sustainability. ايه الحاجات اللي بتدفع الشركات او تحفز الشركات انها تفكر في supply chain thinking. اول حاجه قال الشركات ان احنا يبقى عندي حاجه مرئيه واضحه نقدر نشوفها، يعني تكون واضحه جدا كسلاح قدام الكومبيتيشن او كسلاح قدام المنافسين. تمام. والشركه كمان تكون عندها الشفافيه، وان الشركه تتاكد ان الموردين بتوعها متفقين مع قيم الشركه، وان الشركه كمان تقدر ان هي تتحمل المسؤوليه بتاعتها قدام الالتزامات الاخلاقيه، وان الشركه يكون عندها الثقافه، مسؤوليه مجتمعيه، وان الشركه كمان تثبت ان عندها تميز في السبلاي تشين، وان الشركه يكون عندها لونج تيرم على المدى البعيد بزنس يقدر ينجح، يبقى روبست ينجح، يعني ما يقعش، او الشركه ما تقعش، ما تكونش شركه هشه، ويكون عندها ربحيه. اوكي جو اون.
Of course, for the public want transparency. So you'll see the emergence of this in many consumer products, where it may say this product traveled a certain amount of miles to get on the shelf, or this product has a environmental rating of whatever, or it's had this much carbon emissions. So you've seen a lot more of that. Coffee is a good example, ethically sourced coffee beans, right? So you've seen a lot more of this proliferating into stores, and this is what the public is demanding, right? And also the public is less accepting these days because they have so much choice to really, choose a different product if it doesn't really totally suit their needs. Shireen?
هنا بيتكلم بالنسبة للأفراد والأشخاص إن في ناس مثلا لما بتشتري المنتج بكتب على المنتج ده عدى كام ميل، أو يعني مشينا بيه عدد الأميال اللي مشينا بيه. تمام. الدليفري العميل يقدر يشوف ويبقى عنده شفافية، يقدر يشوف الانبعاثات الناتجة من تصنيع هذا المنتج وعدد الكيلومترات والحاجات والتأثير، وده باين قوي في القهوة، باين في الكوفي بينز. أوكي.
Great. Okay, so now let's look at what frameworks are available to actually assess supply chain and sustainability. So you should never go into this blindly, right? Of course, you as an organization would want to have a plan of action. Okay, how are we going to become more sustainable? And there are various frameworks that exist out there already. There's actually quite a lot. What I'm showing you now is just a few of them. So Dow Jones Sustainability Index is actually just it's an index that exists which measures organizations across what's called ESG, so environmental, social, and governance, right, within the organization. There's the United Nations Global Compact and the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. Both of these provide sort of guidelines or sets of standards that would really guide organizations to how to do business ethically and environmentally friendly wherever they operate, right? The GRI is an interesting one and a very good one to have a look at if you do have some time. There's a lot in this, right? A global reporting initiative. So what's incorporated here is many, many metrics. If you want to see how to measure environmental sustainability within your organization, the GRI is a great resource to go to. We have ISO standards, of course. You may have already implemented some ISO standards in your business or something similar to that. ISO 14001 is specifically related to green logistics or environmental aspects. And then ISO 26000 is specifically related to social aspects. So you could actually go look at those standards and really get a good sense of what constitutes being socially aware and environmentally sound. The Baldrige Foundation is also an interesting one to look at. Baldrige is really a tool that organizations can do to be excellent in their organizations, and what are the ways that they can do it in the form of governance and in other ways as well. Okay, there's also a really good tool to use, and I've been involved with this for a few years now, which is called ASCM Enterprise. And ASCM Enterprise really is a set of standards. The standards give a view of what would be acceptable within various themes to actually go and implement a sustainable supply chain, right? And what's really great about this certification or these standards that are actually publicly available, if you go onto the ASCM website, you can actually get them and they are free. And really what's great about these standards is that they cover everything, all right? You can see here, if we look at this little diagram, you can see the different internal areas, and this would be similar to what you see in SCORE, right? Plan, source, make, deliver, and return, with the results being very important because we always want to have the results in the organization. And then as you can see, moving outwards, looking at the three pillars, the ecological, ethical, and an economic. Moving a little bit further out, the enablement of those things. And some of you mentioned in some of the previous slides that technology was an important aspect of what you were doing and its high adoption. So technology and knowledge is extremely key, important as an overall enabler for these things to happen. The strategy of the organization, how does the workforce enable us? And also how do we govern what we do effectively, right? We can't forget the stakeholder at the very outside of the ring, the supplier and the customer, as well as the community and the government, right? Very important stakeholders for any business. What is the nature of the interaction with each of these entities? So very, very important and a really great resource to go to. Would be happy to talk with anyone who wants to know more about this, but really a good resource to go to if you want to start that journey of understanding you know, how to become more sustainable.
It's a company certification, right?
Correct. It's a company certification, yes. So it's specifically for a supply chain that would be identified in the scope.
So ASCM is used to be Apex because some people don't know this.
Correct. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
It's a supply chain manager. So let me translate quickly.
Perfect.
دلوقتي جرانت بيقول احنا ما نقدرش ندخل كده عميان ونقول هعمل الكلام ده واعمل sustainability. انا محتاج جايد لاينز، محتاج فريم ورك، محتاج مرجعيه. المرجعيه هو حط كذا حاجه قدامنا، داو جونز حاطط GRI، هو بيرشح GRI موديل كويس جدا لان في ماتريكس، في الجلوبال امباكت، في بولدريتش فاونديشن، الايزو في ايزو 14000. دي كلها موديلز مهمه وممكن نرجع لها والريسورسز موجوده نطلع عليها. من الحاجات اللي هو سترونجلي هو كان شخصيا جزء من عملها او تقديمها اللي هي ال ASCM او الاسوسيشن فور سبلاي تشين مانجمنت او ايبكس. لو حضراتكم فاميليار باسم ايبكس اللي هي شهادات السبلاي تشين الشهيره. النهارده اتعمل موديل يعني مبني على 3 اعمده. العمود الاول اللي هو الاثيكال، العمود الاخلاقي، الثاني اللي هو الاقتصادي، والثالث اللي هو الايكولوجيكال. الفريم ورك ده موجود فور فري، موجود على الويب سايت. لو حد حب محتاج ان هو يقراه او يطلع عليه ممكن ندخل ونعمل له داونلود. هو شرح الرسمه اللي على اليمين الدوائر بسرعه، قال اي سبلاي تشين في العالم نبتدي في النص محتاج يحقق نتائج. عمل لنا 3 بلان، سورس، ميك، ديليفر، ريتيرن، دول اللي مشهورين في السكور. طلع بره شويه وحط ال3 بيلرز اللي هم اثيكال والايكولوجيكال والجزء اللي هو اللي خاص بالايكونوميك. تمام. بعد كده نطلع بره الانيبلرز. دايما السكور بيتكلم لغه انيبلرز عشان احقق ده محتاج ايه؟ محتاج استراتيجي، محتاج تكنولوجي، محتاج نوليدج، محتاج علم، محتاج اشخاص ورك فورس تشتغل معايا، ومحتاج جفرنانس او حوكمه. طبعا الفريم والدايره اللي اكبر بره، مين المتاثر بيا؟ المجتمع، الكوميونتي، العميل، المورد، والحكومات. اوكي. They're asking for the link if you can share.
Sure, absolutely. I'll send the link before the end of this presentation, okay?
Perfect. Go on.
Excellent. Will do. And definitely it's worth looking into. So within this framework, there's obviously various more layers to it. So these are the themes, but within the themes, there's criteria. There's actually 65 criteria. And then within the criteria, there's 189 specific standards that exist to really talk to every single one of these points. So it's extremely complete, right, in looking at all of these aspects. Right, so it's a very, very good framework to use. And I will send the link as well, so everybody has access to that. If anyone has more questions on it, feel free to reach out, and we can definitely discuss it further. There is actually a company in Saudi at the moment that is looking at implementing the ASCM enterprise framework. a quick translation for me, Shireen, and then we'll move on.
هو بيقول لو اي حد احتاج يبعت له اي اسئله هو جاهز، هو هيبعت اللينك قبل end of presentation، وده فريم ورك هايل. وبيقول حتى في شركه في السعوديه حاليا بتشوف الموديل ده، ان شاء الله يعني هيكون في شغل معاه. Go on.
Awesome, thank you. I will share the link before the end of this because I'll need to just go off my off the presentation. Okay, perfect. Thank you, everyone. All right, let's move on. So what I want to talk about now is what's called a materiality index. Okay, and the reason why I want to share this with you is because I think this is a really good way for an organization to try and connect what the stakeholder, what the public want, customers, suppliers, whoever that stakeholder is, and also what is important to the organization. Okay, so when we think of a corporate social responsibility initiative, so let's say your organization wants to go and do an initiative that you believe is important, maybe it's feeding communities or some sort of education for communities or something like that. What this is trying to do is say, let's also ensure that this is something that's important to the organization's success and match those two. Then we know where to focus. So really it gives that overall view. So what is materiality, first of all? Materiality is the principle of defining the social and environmental topics that matter most both to the business and to the stakeholders. Okay, Shireen, if you could translate for me.
كلمة materiality من الحاجات الصعب ان احنا نعرفها. فاول حاجة كلمة materiality اللي هي الأهمية النسبية. اوكي، الحاجة دي قيمتها عند الشخص الآخر أو المتأثرين بينا قد إيه؟ الموضوع ده مهم جدا ولا حاجة بسيطة؟ كل المتأثرين اللي هم ستيك هولدرز، فتعتبر الأهمية النسبية أو قيمتها عند الأفراد. تمام؟ زي ما في واحد مثلا يهمه جدا إنه تديله المنتج في ورق مش في بلاستيك، عشان هو بالنسبة له حاسس كده إن هو ما بيضرش البيئة، وبالنسبة لشخص آخر الموضوع مش مهم. فهي أهمية نسبية، ده تعريف materiality. Okay? Go on.
Thank you. And so some of the benefits that we can get from doing this, right? And I will show you what this looks like in a moment on the next slide. But really the benefit is about prioritizing the organization's resources for sustainability issues that matter most to both you and your stakeholders. Also, it's about highlighting areas where you need to manage and monitor issues that are important but maybe not currently addressed. So a lot of this is to do with what should we be doing in the future to become more sustainable. The other one is ensuring the business strategy takes into account significant social and environmental topics. So you can bring in what's important to the outside world through this process and incorporate that into the strategy of the supply chain, the climate strategy in the business, or the overall business strategy, which is really great. And that links into really parts of the process in which you follow, right, within the organization. Of course, it's about taking advantage of opportunities as well. We are a business. We want to take advantage of the opportunities. So that's really, really a key benefit as well of doing something like this. Also to help identify where the company is creating or reducing value for society. So if we look at what we're currently doing versus what we think we should be doing, this is going to help to determine where those gaps are. And definitely from a identification of areas of the most interest to important stakeholders, which really enables us as an organization to report information that is relevant and report out the progress of what the organization is doing out to the stakeholders that need that information. Shireen?
هنا بيقول الماتيرياليتي ما احنا بنشوفها يعني والاندكس ده اهميته ايه الفايده، ايه اللي هيعود علينا. اول حاجه بحدد اولوياتي، بقدر احدد او هايلايت او ابرز المناطق او الحاجات اللي انا المفروض اشتغل واقيسها واحط عيني عليها. بستغل الفرص اللي قدامي، بتاكد ان استراتيجيه الشركه بص على الحاجه المفروض انها تبص عليها من الناحيه المجتمعيه ومن الناحيه البيئيه. بساعد كمان ان انا اساعد الشركه انها تقدر تخلق او انها تقلل المشاكل بتاعتها والفاليو او القيمه المضافه اللي بتقدمها للمجتمع. وكمان ان احنا بنحدد مناطق الاهتمام او الاولويات زي ما قلنا لكل ستيك هولدرز او اصحاب المنفعه اللي معانا في السبلاي تشين بتاعنا. اوكي، go on.
So how do we develop a materiality index? Okay, and I'll show you what it looks like in a second as well, so that you'll get the right picture here. But first of all, let's just define the purpose and scope of the assessment. So which supply chain are we looking at? What is the area of the business that's important to look at when we are talking about the materiality? Because companies can have many different supply chains within the same company. The next thing is to identify key material topics and subtopics. So topics could be things like diversity and inclusion in the workplace, environmental responsibility, greenhouse gas emissions, women empowerment, so many different things that exist within the social and environmental space, and you'll see a few examples in a moment. So that it's just identifying a whole bunch of those things. ASC and enterprise that we discussed in the previous slide can be a very good resource to go and identify what those material topics could be, right? The next one would be to group the topics into key themes, okay, and we'll show you what that looks like. And then to gather information about the impact and importance of those topics from the business point of view and also from the stakeholder point of view. So matching those two and saying, okay, what do you think customer, government, supplier, community, what do you think of women empowerment? Is that important to you? Is that something you think you'd want to see us doing, right? Those are the kind of things we'd want to do, and also do this internally within the organization. You'd want to then test some of the results of that assessment to ensure that it is robust and that you really do have the outcomes that is, making sure that you've really done it correctly. And because you're going to be really spending resources on what comes out of the materiality index. So it's just to ensure that everything is above board. And prioritize the topics that you see, okay? So once you've prioritized what it is we think we should be focusing on, the next step is now to implement an initiative or initiatives which could support that activity. Let's say it's empowerment of women, right? That initiative would be to empower women. How do we monitor and manage that initiative and ensure that it's delivering the progress that we want? Okay, so that's just a list of really how you could get to a materiality index. Shireen?
طيب الخطوات اللي احنا نقدر نعمل بيها materiality index هو شرح لنا 7 خطوات. الخطوة الأولى إن إحنا بنحدد الهدف والسكوب أو المجال اللي إحنا هنشتغل عليه بتاع الأسسمنت اللي هندرسه بالظبط. تاني نقطة بنبتدي نحدد النقاط الأساسية والنقاط الفرعية اللي هنشتغل عليها، مثلا الانكلوجن أو إن إحنا بنحتوي في مجتمع العمل بتاعنا مثلا ناس من أصحاب الهمم، المساواة بين المرأة والرجل، إن يكون في سيدات، تطوير المرأة، عدم عمالة إن الأطفال ما يشتغلوش مثلا معانا. كل التوبكس اللي إحنا عايزين نحطها بنبتدي نجمعها. بعد ما بنجمع النقط دي كلها بنبتدي نجمعها بليفل اعلى شويه، اجريجيت، نطلع ليفل اعلى ونحطهم في كي ثيمز، او ايه الحاجات اللي خاصه بالمجتمع، ايه الحاجات اللي خاصه بالبيئه، او بنجمع الثيمز دي. نبتدي بقى نروح للشركه بتاعتنا، الناس اللي بتشتغل في البيزنس والستيك هولدرز اللي هم الحكومه، اللي هم الموردين، العملاء اللي بنتعامل معاهم، ونشوف رايهم ايه على دور الايتمز اللي احنا اخترناها او النقط دي، رايهم فيها ايه واهميتها بالنسبه لهم ايه. وبعد كده بعد ما بنجمع الداتا دي كلها والبيانات دي كلها لازم نختبرها، احنا بنختبرها عشان نتاكد انها فعلا فاليد وانها روبست، انها فعلا ممثله واقعيه وان هي فعلا نقدر نشتغل عليها. نبتدي نحط الاولويات، بعد كده نبتدي نشتغل على الانيشيتيفز، وليكن مثلا empowering دور السيدات الومن، فبنبتدي نشوف هنقيس ازاي ونقيس النجاح ازاي، طبعا على حسب الأهمية، ونشوف التطور بتاعنا. اتفضل. اوكي.
So this is what it looks like. So if we look at the left-hand side here, and these are all just examples that I found online, right? So this column, this over here, the y-axis would represent the importance to the stakeholders. So you as an organization, of course, would define who those stakeholders are. And then, of course, the impact on the business. Okay, so where they match at the top right-hand side over there is where it's very high. These are both important to stakeholders and also to the business. So you may want to focus some initiatives on these. So let's look at this example. So human rights, water, ethics, values, and culture, trusted products and ingredients, agricultural sourcing, climate action. Here's women's rights and opportunities. These are some of the aspects in this example that were seen as very important, right? communicable diseases. This was also probably before COVID, because this wasn't seen as important at that point, nor as important, right? So they've said moderate, high, and very high in this example. You can see this example here. This was actually Nestle, where they've said there's some slight differences. They have climate change, water stewardship, over and under nutrition, food safety, important aspects to both the stakeholder and also the organization as well. And then looking briefly at this one on the right-hand side, you can see the priority sustainability topics that they've identified. And what they've also done in this example is said, how well do we think we are actually meeting these objectives currently? And then looked at where the difference is between them. So that's also a really good way to see, okay, where's our biggest gaps? What is it that we can do now next to ensure that we are more sustainable in these areas? Okay. Shireen?
هو شكلها هيبقى ايه؟ هيطلع لي الماتيرياليتي اندكس شكله عامل ازاي؟ زي ما احنا شايفين في الرسمه اللي فوق شمال، المفروض افقيا الاكس اكسس عليه تاثيرها على البيزنس، امباكت اون ذا بيزنس، فده افقيا. من الحد الادنى لور على الشمال ضعيف جدا لتاثير عالي على اليمين. الفيرتيكال اكسيس او واي او يعني الضلع الرأسي هو اهميتها ايه بالنسبه للهولدر بتاعي، يعني اهميتها ايه بالنسبه للستيك هولدرز اللي معايا اللي في السبلاي تشين. فبنبص على الحاجات الهاي هاي، يعني هاي اللي هي فيري هاي هتلاقيها فوق على اليمين، مثلا الحاجات اللي خاصه بالسستينابيلتي بتاعت الزراعه، الحاجات اللي خاصه بالغابات اللي بيحصل في الغابات، الحاجات اللي خاصه بالتاثير على البيئه. بعد كده هتلاقيهم مترتبين فوق فيري هاي، بعد كده هاي لحد مودريت، لحد ما بتبقى ضعيفه جدا تحت. وهو حتى كان بيدي مثال لو ضعيفه قوي اللي هي communicable diseases او الامراض اللي ممكن تيجي من تواصل الاشخاص مع بعض، وده طبعا كان قبل الكوفيد، لان بعد الكوفيد ده بقى تاثيره جامد جدا. المثال اللي تحت شمال ده من نسله، فبيوري نسله شايفه الاهميات بالنسبه لها ازاي. ده الاندكس بتاع الماتيرياليتي اندكس، اوكي. وعلى اليمين على اليمين فوق ده برضو اندكس بيوري اهميه الحاجات افقيا بالنسبه للانترنال ستيك هولدرز اللي هم الناس اللي جوه شركتي، وعلى الشمال للاكسترنال. فمن هنا بحدد الاولويات بتاعتي. اوكي.
All right, thank you. All right, so I also just want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So I'm just going to ask one more question to you, and if you just go back onto the poll everywhere. Just out of interest for this, and this is part of what would happen in a materiality index, is what ethical challenges are your stakeholders currently facing? Okay, what do you think your stakeholders, and if you think of your government entities, your suppliers, the customers, the community in which you operate, what are some of the current challenges that you think they are facing? Right, if you could put just a few notes in there, let's see what we typically would get out of here. Let's kind of see that.
احنا نرجع للويب سايت اللي احنا فاتحينه للصفحه ونرد على الاثيكال تشالنجز اللي هي التحديات الاخلاقيه اللي ستيك هولدرز بتوعنا بيواجهوها دلوقتي. فمحتاجين نختار.
Let's see if we get in here. Okay. Okay, let's check. There we go. Okay, it looks like something is wrong. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Something is not updated. Let me just double check that quickly.
I think I see another question on my screen.
Previous question still. Let me just see why that could be. Let me just try to go back onto that. Okay, so for some reason it's not, you can't see it there, but that's okay. If everyone could just put in, maybe put into the chat. So what ethical challenges are your stakeholders currently facing?
Are we choosing from anything or just right?
Yeah, it's from anything. So I think just put in your comments in the chat if you can.
ممكن تكتبوا في الكومنتس في التعليقات بعد اذنكم الحاجات اللي حضراتكم شايفين الشركات التحديات الاخلاقيه اللي عندها ايه.
Okay, energy, water, and waste is one that's coming up there. Great.
But this is not ethical.
Yeah.
I think people like the following question, because what we see on the screen is another question. Which of the following concepts do we most embrace in our organization right now?
Well, let's just see this quickly. See if we can. Okay, it's on now. My apologies. Okay, so you can go back into the poll and check it there quickly.
معلش لو كلنا نكتب على الصفحة دلوقتي ايه التحديات الأخلاقية في الستيك هولدرز facing دلوقتي. Okay?
Yeah. But I do see some that I've made to mention in the chat. So unfair purchasing price, corruption, lack of competency, lack of awareness, governmental corruption. Yes, it happens everywhere. Let's see. That's probably going to be the most common one. Code of ethics, I see is another one there. Thank you, Hassam. Okay, I'm looking for this one. Governance. Governance is a good one to put in there for sure. That's definitely key. Cheating, supply issues. Okay, fantastic. Yes. Yeah, it looks like the typical corruption is coming up there a lot. Employees, relationships, challenges. Okay, fantastic. Yeah. Logistics monopoly. Good. All right. So, well, thank you for this. There's obviously a lot of very similar answers coming out, Chan. This is just giving you an example of how we would go about thinking about the ethical challenges that the stakeholder might face. So that does actually conclude the presentation for today. I think we do have a few more minutes just for some questions before we end this session.
طيب هو كان سؤال على التحديات الأخلاقية وناس كتبت الفساد، مشاكل في اللوجيستكس، مونوبولي اللي هو الاحتكار، quality of materials. فهو دلوقتي بيشكرنا. First of all, I would like to thank you, Grant, for the wonderful preparation and lecture. I enjoyed it. I enjoy every presentation with you. أنا شكرته وهو دلوقتي فتح لنا باب الأسئلة. There are 2 questions in Q&A, Grant.
Okay, so I think the first one I can see there is can you give examples for each item? I think that's from Ramadan Mahmoud there. I think for that one specifically, I think you were talking about the ASCM Enterprise. I will share the link. Would it be possible, Shireen, for me to share the link after the fact and do a mass email to everyone?
Please, please.
Okay, so let's do an email to everyone. And then what I could also do is maybe send you the actual standards which exist there, which would be very helpful, I think, for everybody to see that. So they'll give you that answer, Ramadan. And then the first one, I'm not quite sure what that says. From Medhat. My Q&A there.
The question says, where put fix COVID affect to the supply chain? He's asking about COVID effect on supply chain sustainability.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that I saw happen was people took a slight break from being sustainable and were in a bit of panic mode for a couple of months. But I think people are going back into, thinking about the long-term sustainability of the organization because people were kind of in fight or flight mode for a short time there.
Okay, I seen people in comments, we say thank you. Okay.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for joining it. Absolutely any questions that you may have after this, myself or Shireen know, we can definitely get back to you. But it's been a real pleasure and thank you to the team as well.
And people can reach you easily. So there is a question, what is the relationship between institutional flexibility and business continuity?
Well, I think, so let me go into that one quickly, that question there. Where is that one, Shireen? I can't see that question.
Comments.
Oh, in comments. Okay, let's go to the chat. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess I would say that there's definitely a need for an organization to be, and when we say robust, we're saying that the organization can weather a storm, right? So think of a tree rooted in the organization and a tree that is able to weather a storm, able to weather harsh winds and things like that, but yet it has some sort of stability that exists in the end, right? So that's really what we mean by that. And that helps the organization to maintain longevity, right? To keep it going into the future. So that's typically what that would mean. I think there's 1 or 2 more questions. Do we have time for it, Shireen?
I would like, before you take a question, I would like to ask everyone who's attending with us, right, which country are you joining from? It's interesting for me.
I like that one.
Yeah. So you start. Where are
I'll go in, I'll start it as well.
I think it's cool.
Lots of Egypt.
Yeah. Some from
There's
South
another sun. Yeah, great.
Some from Riyadh.
UK.
I think it's cool.
Definitely, very cool.
Yes. In Germany, someone from Egypt living in Germany, Turkey, KSA. That's really nice. It's nice. Thanks to technology, thanks to everyone who has helped us to meet and learn from each other and have this one fantastic time together.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Much appreciated. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you again, Grant. It's a real good time, and thank you for spending this time from your weekend with us.
Most welcome anytime.
Okay. So I think it's we finished. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Presentation will be shared with everyone. There is a YouTube channel. It will be recorded. So if anyone wants to access this, you can access it. An email will send the presentation and the webinar registration link. It will be great, Iman, if you can send as well or put here the YouTube link. Please like and subscribe. Thank you so much, Grant.